and you can become members of the Green Party of Michigan. We need you, each and every one of you. I know for a fact that I'm looking in this audience at the next Green Party candidate for state Congress. I'm looking at the next Green Party candidate eventually for Supreme Court. I'm looking at a Green Party candidate for a local city council seat, or maybe a mayor's seat. Whatever it is, maybe the Green Party candidate for governor is sitting right here in this room and we just haven't met that person yet. Okay? Maybe Tom Ness, after he's been a congressman for a while, might run for governor. Maybe one of you. The whole point is we're not going away on November 8th. Don't let any of them tell you that what we're doing here now doesn't make a difference. We will not go away, right? I have a lot of respect for Gloria Steinem. She's one of my idols. I have a lot of respect for Jesse Jackson. He's one of my idols. But when these people who are leaders of our movements turn their backs on us because we dare to stand up for radical change and reform in our society, it's time for us to tell them it's time for them to listen again to us. Join the Green Party. That's the best single way that you can say to the leaders of the progressive movement that it isn't us that has left we have not left the Democratic Party, folks. The Democratic Party left us. We now have a political party that speaks to our desires. That's the Green Party. We're right out back.
This campaign is really starting to rock around the country. I think more and more people who are not satisfied with the politics as usual syndrome in Washington are thinking that maybe they shouldn't vote for the lesser of two evils, because at the end of the day they still got evil, right? You know, when elected representatives in government do not use their power, which is invested in, as our founders envisioned, for the benefit of the people, and instead they become careerists, and their top priority is to advance their political career by raising money from the powerful and the wealthy interests, in order to then turn around and sell the government to these same interests. That's pretty serious stuff. And both parties are guilty of that. There is no difference between the way both parties raise their money, who they get their money from predominantly, and the favors that they exchange in return by stripping us of our power over our own government. Point one. Second, I don't think it can be debated that these two major parties, Republicans and Democrats, are becoming more and more and more alike, more look-alike. Because they're funded by the same commercial interests. They're funded by the auto industry, and the drug industry, and the oil industry, the insurance and banking industries, and security industries. They're funded by the petrochemical industry. They're increasingly being funded by exactly the same funders, the same fat cats who attend their dinners. They go to the big Democrat dinner, and then they take a few days off and they go to the big Republican dinner. The amount of business money now in the federal election campaign is over 13 times the amount of money contributed by organized labor. It used to be 3 to 1, 30 years ago. So you can see the gap is broadening. Now, to anyone who asks, why do I say that the two parties are becoming more and more look-alike? I say the following. WTO and NAFTA to the disadvantage of American workers who cannot be expected to compete with dictatorially repressed wages overseas where Chinese people Chinese workers abused by their regime are working with modern equipment in factories that endanger their health and safety for 30 cents an hour, if they're lucky. No one can compete with modern equipment by U.S. corporations having closed down plants here, unemployed workers here, and then shipped them to Guangdong province in China, or Indonesia, or Pakistan, or Mexico, with wages that aren't even living wages in those countries for those people, with police power crushing any attempts of these workers to form independent trade unions, without any power to have safe workplaces, instead of standing in toxic fumes and such heavy dust that they can hardly breathe. And a lot of these workers are little workers. They're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. Because under the World Trade Agreement that Mr. Clinton, Mr. Gore, and the Republicans in Congress enacted, we cannot prohibit imports into our country from countries abroad where these products are produced by brutalized child labor in dungeon factories. We can prohibit the sale of products in this country made by child labor in this country, which is illegal. But we have bound our hands with chains and cannot effectively sustain laws in our country that ban imports from brutalized child labor abroad. Both parties support WTO. Both parties support NAFTA. Both parties support taking hundreds of billions of dollars of your tax money and funneling it to corporate subsidies, handouts, giveaways, and bailouts, including subsidizing with your tax money baseball and football stadiums in cities where schools, clinics, and public transit systems are crumbling for lack of repair. Both parties have stood for lax enforcement against corporate crime, fraud, and abuse. This is the corporate crime, fraud, and abuse that major media expose at their infrequent finest moments. Media like the New York Times, Washington Post, especially the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Time Magazine, and newspapers around the country, including your newspapers, have from time to time had great investigative stories. Page one, reporters work week after week, proudly documenting corporate abuses of tenants and patients and bank customers, corporate abuses of investors, corporate abuses of taxpayers by taking money, corporate welfare style, from them, corporate abuses of the governmental process, corruption, bribery, and nothing happens. The reports come out of 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace, nothing happens. Come out of 2020, nothing happens. Because both parties don't care if nothing happens. Because the only thing they want to happen is to have more of those fat cats show up at those $5,000 or $10,000 a plate dinner. That's what they care about. The other day, Dick Cheney, the other week, Dick Cheney was campaigning on the California coast, up the coast. He stops at Santa Barbara, $25,000 a plate fundraiser. He then goes up a few miles, and he has a reception, $5,000 to shake his hand. I wonder what it would cost to comb his hair. Both tougher law and order against corporate crime, fraud, and abuse. Look how people are pushed around. Look at the gouging interest rates in the ghettos. Look at the rent-to-own rackets. Look at the payday loans with interest rates on the rollover that go 2, 3, 4, 500%. Look at the discriminatory delivery of health care, where the poor pay more, they die earlier, they get sick more, because they're ripped off and because the forces of law and order, Republican and Democrat style, don't extend to corporate executive suites. They don't extend to applying the law and prosecuting and convicting corporate crooks and sending them to jail. And if they did, jail conditions would improve, I assure you. Both parties have not called for stronger legislation. They have not beefed up their prosecutorial resources, whether at the state and national level. Every week, a newsletter called the Corporate Crime Report comes out from Washington, D.C. And the editor tells me he's got so much corporate crime material he could almost put out a daily. And yet, it isn't an issue in the campaign. It wasn't debated at all. And corporate crime, fraud, and abuse takes more lives, produces more injuries, produces more sickness, and steals more property by far than street crime, bad as street crime is. And let me give you some quick examples. Last year, 15,500 people were subject to homicide in this country. Horrendously high, highest per capita in any Western country. But in the same year, 56,000 Americans lost their lives due to workplace hazards. Trauma, particulates, toxic chemicals, respiratory diseases, cancer, crushed bodies, preventable. Last year, according to the EPA, 65,000 Americans died from air pollution, respiratory ailments, and other diseases. 30,000 from power plant pollution alone. Last year, according to the Harvard School of Public Health studies, 80,000 Americans died from the grossest of malpractice in hospitals, negligence or worse. And that's just in hospitals, not in inner city clinics or doctor offices or what have you. 80,000. Last year, thousands of people were killed by defective products like Firestone ATX Wilderness tires under Ford Explorers, medical devices, pharmaceuticals that were hazardous, like Resolin, which killed over 68 people in toxic liver disease before it was recalled by a Food and Drug Administration under Clinton Gore that precipitously and too quickly approved it a few years earlier. And just add it up, asbestos has taken over 200,000 lives in the last 70 years in this country. Lead-based poisoning of little kids, both from lead and gasoline, which fortunately environmentalists have gotten out of gasoline. But now 200,000 minority kids a year are brain damaged or otherwise seriously injured by lead-based paint peeling off crumbling tenement walls. The landlords don't care. Their kids don't get exposed to that kind of lethality. And those are just a few examples of many. In the area of theft of property, it isn't even a contest between street crime and corporate crime. In just one area, healthcare, 10% of your dollar goes down the drain due to billing fraud and abuse. General Accounting Office study. That is now $110 billion a year with a B. Try that. I mean, bank robbers would drool over just 1% of that loot. And you know how hard it is to figure out your computerized bill. Who can understand these bills? They're in code, that's the point. They're very hard to detect when you're overcharged, double charged, charged for services in the printout that you never received. How can you even discern them? And of course, Money Magazine wrote an article a few years ago saying if the insurance departments of the 50 states enforced the insurance laws to protect consumers, $60 billion a year would be saved. And then there are the auto repair rackets. Here in Detroit, ask yourself, when you have campaigns between the two parties, do they ever accuse each other of being soft on corporate crime? Do they ever call for law and order? Do they ever call for 200 more prosecutors? No. Because both parties have abandoned the people of this country and the duty that they owe the people of this country for applying law and order to whoever violates the criminal laws, whether they are in the streets or in the corporate suites. The two parties are on the same page in terms of refusing to take a clear position and fight for the repeal of obstructive labor laws like the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, which we are working to repeal. Just think for a moment. This law is 53 years old. The Democratic Party won't even allow it in its platform as a repeal. In the Democratic Party platform in Los Angeles, they turned down proposals from progressive Democrats. A, to increase aid to the poor, down. B, universal health insurance, now. They refused it. Area after area that former Democrats, 30, 40 years ago, would have taken as a given, these corporate Democrats are rejecting because the Democratic Party has lost and abandoned its historical identity as a party for the working families. If they cannot stand for organized labor, what do they stand for? Both parties are not pushing for a liberal living wage. The minimum wage today at $5.15 an hour, federal, is $2.15 less in real purchasing power than it was in 1968, adjusted for inflation. The economy has doubled. Worker productivity has gone over 60% since then, and you have 10 million Americans, 70% of them adults, making less today at the federal minimum wage by $2.15 than that their predecessors made in 1968, adjusted for inflation. 47 million workers in this country do not make a living wage, even if they work full-time. 1 out of every 3 workers making less than $10 an hour, $5.5, $6, $7, $8, $9 an hour, before you even subtract the cost of going to work. Another car, another health, another auto insurance policy, another repair bill. And all we're told on television, what a booming economy this is. Corporate profits up, stock market up, executive compensation up, a booming economy, and the majority of the workers, according to the Department of Labor, making less today in real purchasing power than 20 or 25 years ago. If this happens in a booming economy with 46 million people without health insurance coverage, 10 million more than when Clinton Gore took office, if this happens in a booming economy, I wonder what's going to happen when the economy goes into recession. It's time for a major change in direction. Now, look at our labor record, fighting even against some unions in 1969. Not all of them, some of them, to establish the Occupational Safety and Health Agency, the coal miner safety and health bill, the black lung disease compensation system. Back there, when there were Democrats who called themselves Democrats, like Phil Burton and Senator Gaylord Nelson and Mondale and Magnuson, these were people who were really Democrats. They championed consumer health and safety. They championed worker rights. The Democrats today in the Senate, with about 8 exceptions, couldn't tie their shoes. You had Senator Philip Hart from Michigan, one of the greatest senators in our history, who even took on the auto industry in his home state of Michigan, pro-labor. And now who do you have in his place? Spencer Abraham, the senator from General Motors, one of the most anti-consumer senators in the U.S. Senate. Now, when the fight between the workers and the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News erupted and the lockout occurred, where were the Democrats and Republicans? They weren't anywhere to be seen. Where were we? Where were we? One of our groups that I started is a litigation group, and it took the case of these workers free of charge all the way to the Supreme Court, and just lost on a tie vote, 4-4, because one justice recused himself. It wasn't the Democrats who did that. It wasn't the Republicans who did that for the workers. It was one of the groups that I started. And I come into Michigan 3 times now, and 3 times I have refused to be interviewed by the Detroit News or Detroit Free Press. Undermining my own efforts and that of Winona LaDuke to get our message to the people of Michigan, because when you don't give them interviews, they're not going to cover you all that much. And then at a news conference, and I'll do it again today, if there are any representatives from the Detroit Free Press or Detroit News, including a photographer, please leave. Let me tell you the difference between this campaign. I have done all these things. I've done all these things regardless of what the position of the unions will be on this campaign. In fact, the unions that I have fought for all these years, and a lot of overtime, on weekends, in the 60s and 70s, are supporting Al Gore and not the Nader LaDuke candidacy. And that doesn't mean the rank and file is going to. And the privacy of the voting booth. Even the union whose logo we represent. Let me tell you one thing. Every union could vote against me and for Al Gore, and you won't slow me down one bit in fighting for the workers of this country. Both parties are not serious about getting rid of dirty money that produces dirty politics. They are not serious because they've had their chance year after year. In every State of the Union message that Clinton has sent to Congress, he's called for campaign finance reform, driven back to the White House and forgot about it. He doesn't have the staff fighting for it, but you know when he was fighting for WTO and NAFTA against the interest of American workers, you know what he did? He opened a war room, that's what he called it, in the basement of the White House, and invited all the corporate lobbyists and cabinet members and sub-cabinet members all out on Congress to get WTO and to get NAFTA through. So he knows what has to be done to get legislation through, but he was too busy spending about 15% of his time is what I estimate. In his presidency, he has spent going around the country in Washington, D.C., raising money. Raising money. That isn't what he was elected for or paid for. It's always on their minds. Money, fundraising dinners, calls, ceremonies, support, trading favors. That's what our country's national government has become. Both Bush and Gore, in fact, are weak on consumer protection. The federal regulatory agencies under Clinton Gore, I am very sorry to say, this has surprised me, maybe as much as it surprised you, are largely as bad, if not worse, than they were under Reagan Bush. The Food and Drug Administration, in the opinion of Dr. Sidney Wolf, who's monitored it closer than anyone else, is the worst it's been in 29 years. Not since the early days of Nixon. The OSHA, the Job Safety Agency, not one chemical toxic control standard issued to keep workers from getting cancer or respiratory ailments or liver damage. Not one in 8 years. That's never happened before in the 8-year segment of OSHA's 30-year history. The Car Safety Agency has been wrecked by Clinton Gore, and the Firestone Ford tragedies are an illustration of a once proud enforcement agency years and years ago that's been gradually, under Republican and Democrat, turned into a consulting firm to the auto companies in Michigan. There are almost no standards being issued. The last recall that was ordered was over 5 years ago, and believe me, there was a need for lots of recalls, as the Center for Auto Safety can document. One can go on, but the cardinal truth is, not only are they bought and paid for by the same commercial interests, not only are they morphing the two parties into one corporate party with two heads wearing different makeup, preventing the American people from having an adequate, clear-cut choice in a two-party dominated system. If you're only going to have two parties, it's a pretty good idea for these two parties to give you a clear choice instead of morphing into one corporate party. And third, they have stripped us of the tools of power. We've never been weaker since before World War II. As voters, our votes are nullified by money in politics. As workers, our efforts to form unions and our efforts to gain some sort of power over the workplace, nullified by repressive labor laws that are still on the books. As consumers, we're told to sign on the dotted line and shut up. When was the last time you were able to take a standard form contract from your auto insurance company, or health company, insurance company, your bank, or your employer, or your installment loan contract from Sears? Have you ever tried to change the wording? We had a fellow once, he walked into an auto dealer, and he took out one of our contracts to buy a car, which is pro-consumer. And he picked out the car, he slapped the contract down instead of in front of an astonished salesman who was preparing the pages of standard form contracts for him to sign. He threw down this consumer contract to buy a car and gave him the pen. He gave the salesman the pen. And the salesman ran to the dealer who called the police. We try to get a human being to answer one of our complaints on the telephone. You get a robotic voice. Yeah, press 1, press 2, press 3. You press 3, you hear someone say, "Your business is very important to us, but our representatives are handling other customer inquiries." And so you're put on hold. They either give you ads because they got a captive ear, or they play music. It's gotten so bad and predictable that when I'm working late at night and I want classical music, I call United Airlines. Then they got us bumper to bumper traffic, wasting thousands of hours of our lives and going back and forth from work, because General Motors, among other reasons, Standard Oil of California, Firestone, conspired in the 1930s and 40s to buy the big electric trolley systems in 28 metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, tear up the tracks, and push us toward a total highway surface transportation option. And for this, they were indicted, convicted by the Justice Department right after World War II in Chicago's Federal District Court. And guess what the fine was for what some economists consider the biggest continuing economic crime of our century, because you're feeling it every day, wasting gas, wasting time, instead of having modern, sleek public transit systems way beyond buses. GM was fined $5,000. Can you imagine that? Have you ever seen a new car ad on television, mired in congested traffic? We don't ever see sleek mass transit with people relaxing, reading the paper, snoozing on their way to work, looking out at a highway with trucks, vans, and cars jammed bumper to bumper. Oh, who's really standing up for that? Who's standing up for a type of economy that allows one breadwinner to have a middle-class standard of living for the family? More and more members have to work at low-paying jobs, commuting longer distances, worrying about daycare, an ailing grandparent, who's going to pay, don't have time for shopping, have to take the kids to McDonald's, no time to have dinner around the table and talk and transmit the wisdom from one generation to another, no time for community activities, just time to cater to a corporate-designed economy that has shut us out of any role and decided where we're going in our political economy. Our poor farmers are being dispossessed by these giant agribusiness firms that Clinton, Gore, and the Republicans never have done anything about. Factory farms, cattle, pigs, chickens, rammed together, pumped with antibiotics because it's such an unhealthy way to raise these animals. And then that gets into our bodies. And of course, they're driving the small farmers out of business. Industrial agriculture is on its way. And then contract agriculture, where the farmers become serfs, signing on the dotted line for a rock-bottom price. You know, they're getting 30 to 40% less for their wheat, corn, and soybean than just 4 years ago. And who has accentuated the concentration and mergers of giant corporations, apart from Microsoft, the Justice Department, the Federal Trade Commission, have fallen down on the job under Clinton, Gore, telecommunications, drug companies, hospital giants, merging, aerospace, merging, drug companies, biotech, merging. Telecommunications now, the cable giants are just a handful that control the pipeline into your living room through your cable networks. You know, you might say, well, gee, who else is saying these things? Let me tell you who else. Not only newspapers and magazines and some better television shows like 60 Minutes. How about Business Week, September 11th, the year 2000. It says too much corporate power. This is the mainstream business magazine. They have ads from GE, General Motors, Ford, Toyota. Okay, look how courageous. Too much corporate power, inside and page after page of devastating detail. They answer, yes. Abusive in all directions. Of course, they credit big business with unparalleled prosperity. Certainly for the top 10%, they're doing very well. But in their editorial, they are so serious about excessive corporate power that they had a phrase, quote, corporations should get out of politics, end quote. And in a poll, the American people, 72% said yes to the question, is there too much corporate power over your lives? It's not just a few commentators. It's millions of Americans who feel that power when they're pushed around on the job. They don't have any rights. When their personal privacies are invaded on the job. When their medical records outside their job, their medical records, their financial records, their genetic records, their credit records. When these computers know more about you than you know about yourself because you can't keep it all in your head at one time, whirling around the world in electronic databases, knowing what medicine you bought, knowing how long you've been on vacation here, knowing what your genetic type is, knowing things about you that no one but you and only you have a right to know, and you have no power. You have no power to control the use of what they have, knowledge about you because they sold you things. And then you may not get a job. Well, some private file on you can't rebut. It may be wrong. You don't get insurance. They'll say, well, in another 30 years you may get some genetically produced disease. They don't want to take a chance. And so it keeps going on and on. The Green Party candidacy of Nader LeDuc stands for the following, and the umbrella is strengthening our democracy so that our government bends to the will of an informed citizenship, an informed citizenry, working in a deliberative democracy. Not a government that bends to the will of giant corporations who have no allegiance to this country other than to control it. I am speaking of corporate extremism, which pillages and plunders and toxifies our air, water, and soil, which defrauds and robs consumers in ways they don't even feel because it's so systemic and latent, like billing fraud and abuse. Corporate extremism that commercializes childhood and sees little children as marketing categories to be exploited, separated from their parents, taught how to nag their parents, getting junk food, over-medication, and violent programming. Corporate extremism at its worst is when they hijack our democracy. They take our government, they buy and rent our politicians, and our government turns against its own people as it favors the corporate interests that form the real decision makers in Washington, who are not the Republicans and Democrats. They are just the representatives of the real decision makers in Washington, the permanent corporate government of 22,000 corporate lobbyists full-time swarming all over the city and 9,000 political action committees. That's the permanent government that has to be replaced by the permanent presence of an informed American people. Against this corporate extremism is the Green Party Reform political movement, which takes its first leap forward on November 7th with millions of voters behind it and never stops running until it either tells these two parties if they don't start shaping up for the American people, they're on their way down and out in future elections. I'll just give you a quick list. It's going to take 3 minutes of what the Green Party is pressing for. Number one, the redirection of public dollars from a bloated corporate welfare budget and a bloated military budget driven by defense manufacturers rather than by national defense considerations, and redirecting it back into the neighborhoods and the communities to build the necessary facilities from schools to clinics to rapid transit, all the things that are going for begging in the country, and to demonstrate what Western European governments demonstrated years ago, that when the government wants to abolish poverty, it will go a long way in succeeding in lifting that scourge on our national conscience. 20% of the children growing up in poverty nationwide, the highest by far percentage in the Western world, and in California it's 25%, and in District of Columbia 34% of the children growing up in poverty. The Green Party stands for universal health insurance, accessible with prevention of disease and trauma as soon as possible. Now, it stands to facilitate the establishment of democratic trade unions and for giving workers more capital share so they just have to work and live on a paycheck-to-paycheck basis, giving them adequate private pension support as well. Other European countries in the western part of Europe have done this years ago. Environmental protection, really making the laws enforced, not just putting it on the book and say, gee, this is a great air pollution law, really putting the wood to the auto industry and to say, liberate your workers, your engineers and scientists, and start getting more fuel efficiency to protect the family budget, reduce pollution, and reduce greenhouse gases. The auto industry has been coddled for 8 years with over $1 billion of your money in a phony clean engine project between the U.S. government, Ford, Chrysler, and GM that's produced nothing, not even a prototype engine. And instead, fuel economy is at its 1980 low. It's back down to 24.5 miles per gallon. This in an administration that purports to be environmentally sensitive. The criminal injustice system needs to be reformed. It is too biased and discriminatory against poor people and people of color. We need to give 6 months notice, withdraw from WTO, NAFTA, and renegotiate trade agreements to lift standards up, not lift standards down. We need to have our own radio and TV stations. And we can get them because we own the public airways, and the radio and TV stations are the tenants. We're the landlords, and we can get back 1 or 2 hours a day with well-funded stations. And where would the money come from? By ending the 70-year freebie holiday, where the radio and TV stations for our property use has paid nothing for our property to the Federal Communications Commission, and start charging them rent for a change, and using the money to fund our own media. What we own together with all other Americans, we should control. We own the public lands, the timber, mineral, oil, gas companies control, and they often get it virtually free from us, thanks to a compliant Washington, D.C. They get gold, silver, copper, free for $5 an acre. A Canadian company got $9 billion worth of gold on our land in Nevada a few years ago, and they bought it for $30,000. $5 an acre is what the U.S. government has to charge due to a law that's over 130 years old that the mining lobby keeps on the books. We own $5 trillion of union and labor pension funds as workers in this country. Why don't we control their investment? Because the labor laws essentially prevent workers from controlling their pension funds. And they give it to the banks and insurance companies or the major employers like GE and IBM, who control the biggest pool of capital in the world that belongs to the workers. If the workers controlled what they own, and they controlled those shares, they would control a good deal of the major corporations in America as their owners. And I don't think those corporations would neglect such giant shareholders and their interest for working people in this country. We favor a civil service that is honored, held accountable, and not stereotyped as lazy and stick in the mud. These people represent us in government. They often lose their jobs when they blow the whistle. Nobody comes to their aid. These people know far more about what's wrong in government than we do, even if we study it intensively. But they are not allowed to speak up. They are not allowed to put forth their best practice every day, because the politicians run the departments and the agencies, and you know who they're beholden to. It's time to make a free, accountable civil service an issue in political campaigns. We believe in highlighting companies that do a great job. We believe that the Interface Corporation in Atlanta, Georgia, is moving toward zero pollution and maximum recycling for its large carpet and tile manufacturing facilities is really a good example. And that ought to be highlighted. Why do we always highlight Bill Gates, Bill Gates? I guess it's because in January of this year, Bill Gates' net worth was equal to the combined net worth of the poorest 120 million Americans, 40% of the population. That's good enough to get a lot of publicity. What does that say about millions of workers who work year after year, decade after decade, and are essentially broke? Assets minus liabilities. You know, consumer indebtedness is now $6.2 trillion in our country. Even if there are 2 and 3 members of a family going to work every day outside the home, they can't make ends meet without going deeper into consumer debt. We favor the preservation of the family farm and the rural America and the breakup of the giant agribusiness firms that are squeezing the livelihood out of the patents, vicious and aggressive industry in the world in that respect, owning your gene sequences. How do you get more ambitious than that? We demand that this industry be brought under full federal regulation and held accountable. We demand that our educational systems emphasize training our students in civic skills and learning how to practice democracy, and studying their community, connecting classroom to community, and as a result, as a byproduct, they'll be much more motivated to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, because they'll come out as confident, experienced, skilled young citizens. Demand a foreign policy that sides with the workers and peasants for a change, not dictators and oligarchs with our tax money funneling weapons. Those of you who want to have more information about subject matter ignored by the 2 major candidates, I give you the website tompaine.com that has them very concisely described one issue after another that Bush and Gore don't want to talk about. I think they're up to 34 now, and they're very concise. tompaine.com. For our website, I have this to say. We believe in public funding of campaigns. In order to set an example, we are taking no corrupt soft money, no corporate interest money, and no PAC money. Only individual contributions from people such as yourselves, either directly or through our website, votenader.com or votenader.org. In other words, we're practicing what we preach so we can preach what we practice and set an example. In so doing, we have unilaterally disarmed. The 2 parties always say they're for campaign finance reform, but they don't want to take the first step until the other party takes the first step. So what they do, while they're arguing over who's going to take the first step, they sink deeper and deeper in the political muck of corrupt politics, raising more and more money from the same corporate interests. We are unilaterally disarmed to set an example. And in other ways, our campaign, as it connects with neighborhood and community groups fighting the good fight in their own way for a better America. We are not looking for photo opportunities. We are campaigning with housing groups, and public transit, anti-poverty, and living wage, and pro-labor, and pro-environment. Groups that want to preserve our national forests from being cut down so we can do other than hand stumps forward to future generations. Groups that are trying to fight off subsidies for stadiums and get that money back in the neighborhoods. Groups that are trying to help poor children, not just by charity, but by structural reforms, on the principle that a society that has more justice is a society that needs less charity. So, between now and November 7th, I hope that you will put a moratorium on small talk with your friends, neighbors, workers, and relatives, and start talking progressive, exciting, political talk, establishing the best and fastest mode of communication when it gets underway. It's called small, it's called word of mouth. Word of mouth is credible and fast. Bring clusters of your friends to the polls and say to them that now they can vote their conscience, their hopes, their their dreams, and their interests in a new political reform movement in America that is going to stay and grow and proliferate and be of, by, and for the people, that is to be connected with the civic and citizen movement. A new party that they can help build, that they can begin to run for local, state, and national office. Just the way Matt Abel is running for the U.S. Senate on the Green Party ticket here in Michigan. Just as Daniel Webster once said, it's the great work of human beings on earth. And that ancient Roman orator, Cicero, defined freedom for the ages when he said, quote, freedom is participation in power, end quote. That's the true meaning of freedom, to participate in power in order to pursue justice, without which we cannot pursue happiness. The pursuit of justice is a prerequisite of the pursuit of happiness. We're moving forward in 50 states. We have 1,000 coordinators on 800 campuses, colleges, and universities around the country. We have a pulsating website. We have attracted the highest paid political rallies by far, filling major stadiums and arenas in Madison Square Garden, the Boston Garden, Target Center, Minneapolis, Seattle, San Francisco, Illinois, and Portland. And we're going to end up in Washington, D.C., in the MCI Center, because that's what we want to take back for the people, Washington, D.C. I just learned that the Democratic Party has spent as much money advertising their candidates at the national level here in this state, $6 million, as we've spent our entire campaign in 50 states. And I ask you, who do you think's got their money worth? I think our supporters have got more than their money worth. I just urge you not to vote for the lesser of two evils, or the least of the worst. If you're happy with politics, you can vote for Bush and Gore, or Gore. But if you're not happy, if you want more power as a voter, worker, taxpayer, and consumer, if you want to be able to band together with your fellow workers, taxpayers, consumers, and voters more easily, if you want to reassert the sovereignty of the people over this country, and what it could mean for the rest of the world in furthering justice and democracy, vote the Nader-LeDuc ticket on November 7th. Thank you.
One more lesson. Repeat after me. A vote for Ralph Nader is a vote for Ralph Nader. Turn around and look at TV cameras for a second. A vote for Ralph Nader is a vote for Ralph Nader. One more time. A vote for Ralph Nader is a vote for Ralph Nader. Yes! Now, everybody out here who said that they wanted to join the Green Party of Michigan, here's the trifold. The table is right outside the door. We need everybody in this room who believes in progressive politics to join the Green Party. We've got literature, we've got t-shirts, the whole 9 yards. Pick it up and join. Thank you.